Well, it looks like we're saddling up for a real humdinger of a deep dive this time. You folks want to talk Mountain Badlands.
The Paramount show and the book, Deadly Justice. Seems like everyone's got an opinion on those.
You got that right. Our listener this week, they're downright smitten with that show, says it's got this, and I quote, unapologetic swagger.
Unapologetic swagger, huh? Sounds like our listener enjoys a good dose of grit with their entertainment.
That they do. And they're not alone. They even included this letter from a fellow fan, someone just as hooked on the show. Seems like they're both especially fascinated by the creators, the Sleeman brothers, and the distinct style they bring to the table.
Well, that makes two of us. I have to admit, the Sleemans aren't your typical Hollywood storytellers. There's a rawness there, an authenticity that's hard to find these days.
And that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. We've got excerpts from the book right here, alongside that intriguing fan letter. Should be interesting to see how those two perspectives complement each other.
I'm game if you are. So, where do we start? Should we give our listeners a little refresher on what Mountain Badlands is all about?
You bet. Now, for the uninitiated, Mountain Badlands throws you right into the heart of the Wild West. Think sprawling ranches, dusty saloons, that whole shebang. But it's more than just a dusty backdrop. You got Jim, your stoic rancher with a hidden past. Always a recipe for good drama, right?
Oh, absolutely. And let's not forget Megumi. She's not your typical rancher's wife. She can handle a rifle with the best of them. And then there's Paul, Jim's brother. Now there's a powder keg just waiting to blow.
Oh yeah, Paul's a real piece of work.
Yeah.
But that's what our listener loves. They practically cheered when he declared, "Beaver and women are on the house," during that bar scene.
Right, subtle as a runaway stagecoach, that one. But you gotta admire the Sleeman's commitment to their characters. These folks are rough around the edges, but they're also fiercely loyal, bound by a code of honor that's as unforgiving as the land they inhabit.
And let's not forget, good old Steve Jugs. You gotta love a villain you love to hate.
You're telling me he's the epitome of greasy corruption. But even with all those colorful characters and that Wild West action, you included a review from someone who claims they're not even a fan of Westerns, yet something about Deadly Justice grabbed them.
I saw that too. They even said the pacing and the atmosphere are what really drew them in, not just the shootouts and showdowns.
Yeah.
They called it, get this, Law and Order meets classic Western.
Now that's an interesting comparison. I wouldn't have thought of it myself, but knowing the source material, they're not far off.
So we've got this intriguing mix of opinions. A fan who revels in the gritty dialogue, another who digs the atmosphere, and someone who found themselves captivated despite not being a fan of the genre.
And let's not forget the language. Our listener made sure to point out those colorful phrases you mentioned earlier. The Sleemans certainly don't shy away from a good cocksucker or motherfucker when the situation calls for it.
Right. And it begs the question, is Mountain Badlands just a guilty pleasure, a chance to revel in a little frontier naughtiness? Or is there something more sophisticated at play here, something that speaks to a wider audience, even those who wouldn't typically gravitate toward this kind of story?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the answer lies somewhere in the story of the creators themselves, those enigmatic Sleeman brothers.
And you know what? I think you might be onto something. You see, the book came with this foreword by Wyatt Sleeman, the quieter brother, from what I gather. And this isn't just your standard author's thank you note.
Oh, not at all. This thing reads like a deep dive into a family memoir. I mean, we're talking multi-generational sagas here.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me we're getting a history lesson alongside a gritty Western? Now, that's not what I expected. What kind of details are we talking about here?
Wyatt goes way back, all the way to their great-grandfather, Tom Sleeman. Picture this. Classic American West upbringing. Orphaned young, scrappy as they come. But then he gets wind of gold. All the way in Australia.
Hold your horses, Australia. I thought we were knee-deep in cowboy boots and Stetsons here.
And that's the thing about the Sleemans. They zig when you expect them to zag. Tom, he sets off, practically penniless, faces down hardship after hardship, but eventually he strikes it rich in the Australian outback. A classic self-made man story, wouldn't you say?
Sounds like it. But something tells me there's more to it than that. Knowing the tone of Mountain Badlands, I'm guessing this wasn't just some feel-good success story.
You've got a nose for these things. Wyatt, he doesn't sugarcoat it. He emphasizes the brutal reality of it all, the sheer grit it took to not just survive, but to thrive in that kind of environment.
Starting to see shades of Jim Sleeman in his great-grandfather already. That quiet intensity, the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Right. It's like looking at a blueprint for a character. But it's not just individual toughness that Wyatt emphasizes. He talks about this family motto they have: God, gold, guns, guts, and glory. Now, on the surface, that might sound like something you'd find on a biker bow napkin.
Yeah, not exactly subtle. So how do those seemingly disparate ideas come together? What did that motto actually mean for the Sleemans?
Well, it's like you've got this inherent contradiction, right? On one hand, you've got God, you've got glory. That's suggests some higher purpose, a sense of morality. But then you throw in the gold, the guns, even guts, and it's a whole different ballgame. Suddenly you're talking about the harsh realities they faced, the grit it took to survive in a world where those ideals are constantly challenged.
You know, it's funny you should put it that way. Cause that tension between right and wrong, between doing what you got to do and holding on to your principles.
Yeah.
It's all over Bear Mountain Badlands.
Exactly. It's in the very DNA of the story, just like it's in the Sleeman family DNA. Look at Jim. Here's a man clearly haunted by his past, trying to do right by his family, by the land, but he's also got that edge to him, a willingness to cross lines when he has to.
And Megumi, too. She's not afraid to get her hands dirty, but you can tell it weighs on her, the sense of honor, I guess you'd call it. It's like she's constantly trying to reconcile the world she came from with the harsh realities of the Bear Mountain Badlands.
And that's what makes their take on the Western so compelling. It's not just black and white, good guys and bad guys. It's this nuanced exploration of what it means to be human in a world that constantly tests your limits.
For sure. But you were about to tell us more about the Sleeman family tree. You said things get even more interesting when we meet the next generation.
Oh, yeah. Wyatt describes his grandfathers, and get this. One of them, a hard-nosed journalist who rubbed shoulders with the likes of Al Capone.
Ooh, seriously. I mean, that screams crime thriller, not gritty Western.
Right. And yet, his other grandfather, a Supreme Court justice. But here's the kicker. Even after reaching the top of the legal world, this guy still identified as a cattleman at heart.
So you've got this family, this bloodline, where on one hand, you're seeking justice within the system, and on the other hand, you're dispensing it on your own terms, out on the range. It's wild.
It's that push and pull, that constant negotiation between those two worlds that seems to define the Sleemans. Even their own father, Wyatt says, was this incredibly driven businessman, the kind of guy who, built an empire from the ground up.
Classic American dream, right. But knowing the Sleemans, I'm guessing there's a but coming.
Oh, there's always a but. See, despite all that ambition, Wyatt describes his dad as a nature's gentleman. Said he found his peace in nature, felt most at home out under the open sky, even had it engraved on his tombstone.
Wow. Sounds like success for the Sleemans wasn't just about money or power. It was about holding on to that connection to something bigger than themselves, whether it was family or some kind of moral compass or even just the natural world.
You got it. And then there's their mother. She's the one Wyatt credits with instilling a love of storytelling in him and Bear.
Get out. So Bear Mountain Badlands, this whole saga, it all started with bedtime stories.
Well, not exactly bedtime stories. Wyatt said she'd give them books by guys like David Morrell, Ian Fleming thrillers, spy novels, that kind of thing. Encourage them to embrace those darker, more complicated narratives.
That's incredible. And, thinking about those darker narratives, it makes you wonder, knowing the content of their work, all that violence, the language, did their parents ever have anything to say about it?
Funny you should ask that. Remember Megumi, Bear's wife? We talked about her Japanese heritage, her family's deep connection to the land.
Yeah, pretty hard to forget after you drop that little bombshell about her samurai ancestry.
Right. Well, Wyatt suggests that her family, they didn't shy away from Bear Mountain Badlands at all. If anything, they saw a certain honor in the way violence was portrayed.
You mean they weren't put off by it, by the brutality, the rawness of it all?
Not at all. Wyatt implies that for a family steeped in warrior traditions, they saw it as honest, a reflection of a world where survival often meant making impossible choices.
Man, talk about a family history. I mean, we've got a motto that's one part church hymn, one part outlaw anthem. We've got grandfathers on both sides of the law, a father who made millions but found solace in nature, a mother who nurtured a love of storytelling, and a wife whose own heritage is rooted in the warrior spirit. It's almost too perfect, like something out of one of their own stories.
And maybe that's the point, right? That art imitates life, or maybe it's the other way around. Either way, this little deep dive into the Sleeman family history, it's shown us that Bear Mountain Badlands isn't just some random story they dreamt up. It's a reflection of who they are, where they came from.
Mind blown. But for our listener who's all about those explosive action scenes, like that bar fight at the Bear Mountain truck stop where Paul drops that line about beaver and women being on the house,
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's that final showdown at the end. Hoo boy.
Uh,
Talk about a bloodbath.
Pure Western catharsis. Those scenes, though, as much as they get the heart pumping, they're not just there for shock value.
Oh, you're saying there's more to those explosions than meets the eye.
Exactly. Take that bar fight you mentioned. On the surface, it's a chaotic free-for-all. But look at how each character moves through that chaos.
You're right. Now that you mention it, it's like their fighting styles are
Right.
telling us something.
Precisely. You've got Jim all controlled intensity, almost like he's following a strict choreography.
Right. And it's effective. Not a wasted movement.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is it's almost like an echo of his great-grandfather, Tom, battling the elements in the Australian outback. This sense of measured force, knowing when to hold back, when to unleash.
It's like that line from that old war movie. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle.
And then you have Paul. Now he's a different beast entirely.
Yeah, Paul's all whirlwind and bravado. You'd almost think he enjoys the chaos.
And maybe he does. But don't underestimate him. There's a shrewdness behind those wild eyes. He's not just fighting, he's orchestrating.
It's almost like, I don't know, like Law and Order, but set in the Wild West.
Okay, I can see that. That connection to actual history definitely adds a layer of weight you don't get with your typical Western.
Exactly. And I think that might be a good place to start digging into these materials you've provided. You actually got your hands on the Sleeman family history.
I did, and it's incredible. This foreword here talks about their great-grandfather. Get this. The guy runs away to the Australian gold rush at 11 years old. 11.
Wow. Talk about grit.
That's an understatement. And their family motto, are you ready for this? God, gold, guns, guts, and glory. It's like something straight out of the story itself.
You can't make this stuff up. But that connection between their real lives and the story they're telling, it explains so much about why Bear Mountain Badlands feels so real,
Oh, absolutely. And get this, Bear, the older brother. He follows the family tradition, becomes a rancher, but then you have Wyatt, the younger one. He goes off and becomes some high-powered geopolitical thriller writer. I mean, how cool is that?
It's like they each took different paths, but still ended up drawing from that same well of, well, family legacy, I guess you could say. Ranchers, a Supreme Court justice, even a journalist known for his sharp wit and even sharper investigations, all in the family tree.
Wow, no wonder their writing feels so authentic. It's like they have this whole history ingrained in them, both the rough and the intellectual sides.
Precisely. It's that blend that I think makes this more than just another cowboy story. They're not just playing cowboys. They lived and breathed this world, even if it's generations removed.
It really is amazing how much of themselves they poured into this world, and it shows especially in those fight scenes. I mean, talk about intense. And then you've got Jim right in the thick of it, one shot, takes down this guy, and then mutters, "Cocksucking piece of shit."
See, that's what I mean about the dialogue. It's raw, it's gritty, it gets right to the point.
No time for fancy words in Bear Mountain. But even with the limited dialogue, you understand so much about Jim in that moment. The rage, the pain.
Years of it, all bottled up, just waiting to explode.
Can explode, it does. But then you've got Steve Jugs, who's a whole other kind of chaos.
That guy's a walking, talking bar fight waiting to happen.
And the way he uses that whiskey barrel, I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Pure genius.
Yeah.
You know what they say, right? Don't bring a bottle to a whiskey barrel fight.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Words to live by in Bear Mountain, that's for sure.
Absolutely. But the saloon shootout, as crazy as it was, that's just the beginning, right? I mean, the Fleemans, they don't let up. The burning of the old mill, that scene just stayed with me.
Oh, man, that's a tough one to shake. It's like you can feel the heat from the flames just watching it.
It's intense, right? And the way they build that tension, like a slow burn leading up to this inferno.
The Sleemans, they understand how to use silence, how to make you wait for it, and then when it hits...
It hits hard. And visually, I mean, talk about a spectacle.
Stunning. Tragic, of course, but there's this beauty to it, the way they capture the fire, the destruction.
It's like its own character almost, right? This destructive force that changes everything. And then you've got Jim's final showdown with Mad Dog.
Now that's a showdown for the ages. Talk about a clash of titans.
The music, the dust, the way they face off, you just know something big is about to go down.
And then that line from Jim. "I ain't here to be saved, motherfucker. I'm here to finish this."
Chills. Every time. That's Jim in a nutshell right there, isn't it? No more games, no more running.
He's been through so much, and you can hear it in his voice, the weight of everything he's done, everything he's lost.
And he's finally ready to confront it head on. It's what makes him such a compelling character, He's not perfect, not by a long shot, but he's trying to find his way, trying to do right by himself, even if it means breaking a few rules along the way.
Exactly. And the Sleemans, they don't shy away from those moral complexities, those gray areas. That's what makes Bear Mountain Badlands more than just your average Western. It makes you think,
It sure does. It's a wild ride, it's action-packed, but it also makes you question everything, right? Good, bad, right, wrong.
it's a story that stays with you, that's for sure, just like the best Westerns do.
Exactly. Well, I don't know about you, but I am suddenly in the mood for a shot of whiskey and a dusty trail. Until next time, folks, keep it gritty.